Now, with the US having exited Afghanistan after 20 years, there are now concerns that regional players may sweep in to fill the vacuum. Specifically, China and Pakistan. Welcome to WION World is One. My name is Priyanka Sharma, and today in our special weekly broadcast of the WION-VOA Co-Production, we'll be discussing the role of China and Pakistan in Afghanistan. So let's get started. With the US out of Afghanistan after nearly 20 years, some experts say that China and Pakistan are stepping in to provide both immediate support and the prospect of long-term investment for the Taliban acting government in Kabul. Voice of America's senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports on what could this mean for the region as well for the US security interests. Take a look.
Some Afghans are selling their prized possessions to finance their escape from Taliban rule or just to pay for food. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the country is facing a humanitarian crisis.
Humanitarian aid will not solve the problem if the economy of Afghanistan collapses. And we know that the risk is enormous and that there is a dramatic lack of cash.
On Monday, the international community pledged more than $1.2 billion for humanitarian and development assistance for Afghanistan. The Taliban's acting foreign minister also called for access to the country's $10 billion in foreign assets, much of which has been frozen in the United States.
We believe that the USA is a big country. They need to have a big heart. Afghanistan is a poor country and must not be treated cruelly. We want positive and inclusive relations with the international community, and we ask them also to stop putting more pressure on the Afghan people.
The U.S. and other Western countries are calling on the Taliban to respect human rights, and in particular the rights of women and girls, before the assets are released. But China and Pakistan have sent food and health supplies to the Taliban acting government and held meetings with Taliban representatives. Experts say for Pakistan, the support for the Taliban is nothing new.
Pakistan certainly has had a relationship with the Taliban or individuals who constitute some of the Taliban leadership going back over 30 years.
The U.S. State Department is calling on Pakistan to hold the Taliban accountable, as Islamabad had pledged to do.
We are going to continue to look to Pakistan and to other countries in the region to make good on their public statements, on commitments they have made, to, in different ways, step up to support the people of Afghanistan.
Another analyst points out that for Pakistan, India is always a factor in the equation.
Pakistan is worried about India. India is its number one enemy. And so it definitely wants a government in Afghanistan that is friendly towards Pakistan and not towards India.
As for China, one expert says the important thing to keep an eye on is long-term investment in Afghanistan.
With regards to China, it's the potential for investment over the long term, following the template that it has used on its Belt and Road program. In Central Asia, this would typically begin with grants for large-scale road and infrastructure construction. Those have not been announced yet.
Another expert points out that investing in Afghanistan is a risky proposition.
China is being very careful about how it supports Afghanistan and essentially doesn't want to be sinking money into a black hole with no guarantees of either government survival or any guarantees of the jihadi groups that China is worried about that the Taliban supports.
Qatar is also providing tons of medical and food aid to Afghanistan and is working to get the Kabul airport back up and running. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
For more details, joining us now on this special broadcast is Voice of America's correspondent Amy Hybels from Washington. Amy, welcome to WION World is One. Now, other nations are rushing to fill the void left by the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. What is the U.S. plan to maintain its influence in the country?
Well, sure. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the U.S. has organized key countries to try to leverage their influence together over the Taliban. Now, as you recall, Blinken recently led a ministerial meeting of 22 countries, plus NATO, the EU, and the United Nations, to try to get everybody on the same page. Blinken also said the U.S. was prepared to engage with the Taliban in coordination with allies and partners, quote, on the basis of whether or not it advances our interests, end quote. Now, VOA has spoken to analysts about this topic. One said that with military intervention no longer a point of leverage, the challenge is, quote, how to be diplomatic with a terrorist group. There's also the frozen assets worth billions of dollars belonging to the Afghan government that's held in American banks. That could potentially be leverage. Additionally, Blinken has pledged an additional $64 million in new U.S. aid for a total of $330 million in assistance to the Afghan people this fiscal year. That will flow through independent organizations. That money will not be going through the Taliban government. So, we're really going to have to wait and see if this soft power approach makes a difference. Analysts that we spoke with say it really depends on how the Taliban acts. Do they continue to act as a extremist group, or are they going to move towards governing Afghanistan as part of the international community in some form? We're just going to have to wait and see how this plays out.
Right, Amy, there are now growing indications and concerns that supporters of both the Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State terror groups have their sights set on Afghanistan. Now emboldened by the Taliban takeover of the country late last month, what is the United States doing to ensure that they don't strike again?
Well, the current assessment by the U.S. intelligence officials, probably conservatively, is that al-Qaeda could have the capability to at least threaten the U.S. within a year or two. The Central Intelligence Agency deputy director warned that U.S. intelligence gathering capability in Afghanistan is not what it was 6 months ago, but he also said it wasn't an insurmountable obstacle. He said it was still possible to collect intelligence there without a physical presence on the ground. Now, in an interview on the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said the U.S. has gotten much better at analyzing and tracking various threats around the globe in the last 20 years. He said the U.S. ability to strike has increased by, quote, orders of magnitude. He also said the U.S. can operate a lot better with any interagency in terms of its ability to share information and the ability to coordinate and deconflict.
Right, Amy, my final question on this subject. Let's talk about terror threats around the globe. What other countries does the U.S. see as potential hotbeds for terror groups?
Well, sure. In his interview with VOA, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin did not want to give us any specific intelligence assessments, but said that in Africa, specifically in Somalia, he said the U.S. was seeing a number of transnational terrorist organizations looking to operate freely there. Now, broadly speaking, Secretary Austin said transnational terrorists will look for ungoverned spaces to go operate out of. He pointed out that everywhere on the globe where there's a breakdown in governance or weak governance or areas that are ungoverned, he said they can expect that at some point there's a possibility that terrorist activity will take root in those places.
Amy, thank you so much for all those inputs. Stay with us on this special broadcast. We'd like you to weigh in on another important story. Let's move on now. The World Health Organization says that low-income countries still do not have enough COVID-19 vaccines and is now urging wealthier nations to deliver more doses. Voice of America's Mariama Diallo has this next report. Take a look.
The World Health Organization Director General sounded the alarm again on the short supply of COVID-19 vaccines in low-income countries.
Globally, 5.5 billion vaccine doses have now been administered. But 80% have been administered in high and upper middle income countries.
He says despite talk about the importance of vaccine availability worldwide, there has been little action to tackle shortages in low-income countries.
High-income countries have promised to donate more than 1 billion doses, but less than 15% of those doses have been materialized. Manufacturers have promised to prioritize COVAX and low-income countries. We don't want any more promises. We just want the vaccines.
As of last month, the United States had donated more than 110 million doses to more than 60 countries worldwide. The Director General, who opposes the widespread use of booster jabs for healthy people, also called for an extension of the moratorium on such shots beyond its original September deadline. This comes as Israel became the first country to offer booster shots to people over the age of 60. The country has since expanded its program to include frontline workers and people 40 and over.
I'm very happy that it's open to 40 and over. I've been excited and waiting for it.
Earlier this month, France also made the offer to people over 65 and to those with underlying health conditions. Cicely Tatoguin, a medical student who's helping administer the shots at a pharmacy in Paris, explains.
Over time, there's a drop in antibodies for people who were vaccinated just over 6 months ago. And so we want to give a booster to increase the levels of antibodies for those who did it a while ago and are at risk, people with deficient immune systems and elderly people with existing conditions.
Canada and Germany have also announced booster campaigns. Mariama Diallo, VOA News.
We still have Voice of America's correspondent Amy Habels live with us from Washington. Amy, my next question for you. Now, the top U.S. officials are debating whether Americans who have been vaccinated should receive a booster dose or not. What will this discuss?
Well, U.S. government advisors are actually meeting virtually today to discuss if there's enough proof that a booster dose of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine is safe and effective. It's the first public step towards deciding which Americans may get an extra dose and when. Now, Pfizer argues that while protection against severe disease is holding strong in the U.S., immunity against milder infection wanes somewhere around 6 to 8 months after the second dose. Now, when Pfizer administered the extra dose to a test group, they recorded a much higher antibody level than after earlier shots, and those antibodies appeared strong enough to handle the Delta variant. Pfizer also pointed to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's data from Israel. That study tracked about 1 million people aged 60 and older and found those who got the extra shot were far less likely to become infected soon afterwards. Now, the White House was expected to start a booster shot campaign next week, but that may depend in part on what the FDA's independent advisory panel decides after their discussion today. Of course, the broader issue here in the United States when it comes to controlling the Delta variant, according to experts, is vaccinating the unvaccinated.
Amy Habels, thank you so much for all those inputs, and thank you for joining us on this special broadcast on WION World is One.